Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. This week I'm with Michael Lutz, CEO of iotaSciences and Osteolabs. Michael leads two innovative companies, and we talked about his journey from chemist to biotech entrepreneur, what he's learned along the way about building capital-efficient biotech businesses, and why staying close to the science helps keep leadership challenging and rewarding. I'm back on Careers in Discovery with Michael Lutz. Michael, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you.
Good to see you. So, Michael, you're involved in lots of different things, and we always like to talk a bit about what you're up to at the moment. You're mainly running two companies, Osteolabs and iotaSciences, but give us a bit of an insight into sort of the breadth of your activities at the moment, and tell us a bit about those companies.
Okay, yeah, happy to do. Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of stuff, from throughout my career, starting with drug discovery, drug development, even sales marketing on the pharma side, and sort of with both Iota and Osteolabs. I'm a bit back to what I have been doing most, for the last 25 years. And one is iotaSciences. It's a leader in the field of single cell handling. Mm-hmm. And we're a sort of a life sciences tools instrumentation company based in Oxford, but basically operating internationally. And then Osteolabs is a sort of emerging diagnostic company with a very interesting technology coming out of the Helmholtz Institute in Kiel, so in the northern part of Germany. And that company has been taking that technology so far that we now have a first test on the market for early risk determination for osteoporosis, and eventually it may also be sort of, providing early insights into bone metastasis.
Yes, I see. Okay, interesting. So very different fields.
Absolutely, yeah.
Apart from you being the CEO of both, is there any connection between the companies, or are they completely separate?
Completely separate. I mean, most of my time I'm actually devoting to towards iotaSciences, and sort of, then basically a bit of my spare time I'm leading Osteolabs as well. So
you'll have to, when we finish recording, you'll have to tell me a bit about how you find that spare time, because I could do with some advice. So tell me more about iotaSciences. Obviously, single cell is a growing and has been a growing area of study and a growing area of attention. I would imagine that's been good for your business, but tell us a bit about what you're doing there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, sort of, cell culture and anything related to sort of cell interaction has been on the horizon for a long time. In the lab space, about FACS and handling cells there. I think so over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, there's sort of this evolving field of single cell handling. It originally started out with monoclonal antibodies and cell line engineering, cell line development. So I was involved with one of the front runners as a senior advisor, Cytina, based in Germany. Was sort of basically there just right after they started until the time they actually had been sold to Cellink, as the company was called at that point in time, now Bico. And that basically, at the end of the day, sort of, brought me to Iota, simply because, having been in the space a little bit, and Iota has a bit of a different flavor and a bit of different direction. We have been less involved in cell line development, cell line engineering. We have been focusing from the get-go basically on stem cell handling, which is even sort of a more tricky thing. iPSC, CRISPR-Cas, and this is certainly sort of a very emerging and highly vibrant field at this point in time. And what we're doing is actually sort of providing a bit of a picks and shovel model for researchers and developers that actually want to sort of advance cell therapies or gene therapies through the R&D funnel quicker and cheaper. That's sort of, what we're aiming to do with our platforms that we have developed here.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm keen to ask you this because you're a very experienced CEO these days, and you've been doing this role for a long time, as well as non-executive positions, chair positions. You've seen it from that side as well. In a company like Iota and the other things that you're involved in, I find there's a lot of misconceptions about what the role of a CEO is and what CEOs actually do. What's your view of it?
Well, it's basically could be everything and nothing. I think if it's sort of by the meaning of the word, then basically you're representing the company to investors. You're going to nice events and giving talks and presenting the company to a lot of people. That is sort of to some extent it's the fun part. And then, but basically, most of the time, you're actually really sort of nuts and bolts involved in daily operational detailed stuff. It could go down to, I said, normally all those companies that have been involved, most of them were pretty small or are pretty small. You're doing a lot of stuff that in larger corporations you have a lot of people that are right, filling out Excel sheets and all of that. So this is then basically down to yourself and do this, building out models, dealing with payments, working on hiring. It's sort of pretty diverse activity there.
Yeah.
And I think the smaller the company is, that basically there's sort of more diverse and the more sort of cross-functional your role is there. It's not that you're basically just sitting there and waiting for people to come to you and report about topics and issues, and then you sit there and then it's thumb up or thumb down. You're in the middle of the action.
Yeah, absolutely. So being adaptable, being flexible is key. I find as well that you kind of have to give away all the good jobs, right, to get people to come and work with you. So you end up with everything else. Yeah, interesting. Well, I want to dive into all this a bit more and talk more about your journey to this point, because it's a fascinating one. So you're a chemist by training, I believe.
Oh yeah, but that was a long time ago. Yeah.
Well, why chemistry in the first place? What brought you to this career path, do you think?
But I like chemistry, even in back in school, and there was always a sort of on the one hand side it was chemistry, and on the other side it was economics. So I was thinking very hard, okay, what am I gonna do? And at some point in time, at the end towards sort of school exam, I said, okay, the chemistry studies are going to be told to be difficult and long lasting. So I said, but I'll try. Let's see how far I get. And ultimately, sort of, I ended up with a PhD after a couple of years, and I think it was a good basis. Now looking back in hindsight, I think the life sciences industry has been a very rewarding, very interesting one. Yeah. If I would have taken the route, from the start to become a sort of an economist, some sort of management kind of guy in the beginning, and particularly sort of in this industry, you need to understand, what's going on from a research and development perspective. Not to the latest and the largest detail, but at least high level. I think you need to understand, what's happening. As it's sort of, impacting any of your decisions ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much of a bearing do you feel that, and it may be none at all, but how much of a bearing do you feel or influence do you feel that early training has on how you operate now?
Well, I think, the let's say the scientific part is basically, it's a key decisive factor for myself in order to get engaged with a company. If it's just boring stuff, or I feel it's a sort of basically it's, let's say, the next company after 10 others that have been trying in the space, it's normally not for me. I sort of like a bit of that adventure and unknown. And particularly if it's something that ultimately will provide benefit to customers or to patients in particular. So this is sort of, what has been sort of driving the decisions there. And that, I've been dealing in my career with sort of complete new frontiers in the field of genomics, non-invasive prenatal testing. I've been building up the biggest European player in that field for almost 10 years. I've been involved in one of the leading companies doing pharmacogenomics, so a bit also on that front. Then, also been involved in immunology. And so it's always been sort of, quite fascinating to see now, after those many years, how things sometimes get together, and then you understand, okay, what you have been doing 10, 15 years ago is sort of, now been involved in such a field that others are, basically taking to the next and the next level.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's always building on what went before, right? The most cutting edge technology has its roots elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Also, I think let's say basically getting engaged in a biotech company. Ultimately, it's always the same thing. You need to have sort of a decent, interesting science. Basically need to turn into products or competitive services that are. Ultimately, somebody is paying for it. Customer, patients, whatever. And that is, I think, sort of, perhaps one of the most fascinating and interesting parts in order to sort of, shape those products and services that ultimately somebody is really sort of, coming up with money that is landing on your bank account, and you see sort of business growing. With all the challenges around that, but that's sort of, I think, the rewarding part on that side. And I think with the one company I've been involved at the end of the day, when I left after close to 9 years, we had been providing about 250,000 diagnoses for pregnant women. That's a huge number.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know that you had an impact on a lot of patients there.
No, 100%. And I think it's a really important message there, because I think for a little while as a sector, we kind of forgot about, products and revenue and profit and cash and these sorts of things. Well, not so much cash, but certainly the others.
Well, you need the cash. You need the cash in order to keep business going, to keep R&D going. Ultimately, I think, you can do a lot of great research. But at some point in time, unless you remain in academia, and I think this is also sort of a very valid career path. Somebody would like to see that you give them the money back, whether investors or bankers or whatever. It's always the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the sort of early days of your career, so you did your PhD in chemistry back in Zurich. And tell us about what happened from there. Tell us about those first forays into the rest of your career.
Yeah, there was not a clear path, and this is it. And I think it was while I already did my PhD, it was clear for me I'm not going to stay in the lab, following a postdoc career and an academic career, and then perhaps become a professor at some point in time. So I knew I wanted to get into industry, but basically I had no real idea what I wanted to do. Right. And I also knew at some point in time that leaving the lab will be sort of a step, not being a scientist at the bench forever. So, and then basically what has happened is that I was quite lucky to find even if it was a postdoc position with Novartis, just at the point of time merger between Siva and Sando. And I sort of, became part of a small dedicated research group, which was sort of, very exposed, working on some sort of, cross-functional projects. And that was quite interesting. That was really interesting. It exposed me to a lot of also sort of management stuff at that point in time. I don't know for what it was good, but basically, I think a couple of weeks after I started there, I got a job offer to do a general management trainee program with a chemical company in Germany. Okay. So I was, back to the question, okay, am I going back to the economics part, or combining it somehow. So then I try to to avoid a decision for some time, but at some point in time, I was forced to make a decision, and basically I left it with Novartis saying, okay, we realized you're not going to be sort of our top researcher. But we would like to, keep you involved in some way, and say, go and join that company, go to Munich, work for them. And if you feel that you want to get back, then do so. And this is exactly what I did. So I went there, did the trainee program, had a couple of very nice projects, got me, sort of significant expertise and skills on the financial side, on the business side. I was a young chap. I mean, early 30s, building a key account management strategy for a large chemical company. So I think it was pretty unique. Dealing with all the C level people there. Basically on a daily, weekly basis. But at some point in time, I said, family reasons, and also sort of, I realized that, chemical business is a bit different than life science business. So I got back to Novartis, and then basically had sort of another very lucky event that I got in just by the time when the CEO changed. Mm-hmm. So I worked for the old CEO for a little while, and then he said, well, you go now and work for our new marketing guy, our new head of marketing. And that's what I did. So I worked for marketing for a little while. I worked for business development, and basically got my first group to build out across the pond. Some people in Basel, some people over in the US, sort of, basically sitting on the plane quite a bit. And then at some stage, basically, sort of, then got promoted, becoming sort of the head of global competitive intelligence at the age of, I think, 33, 34. And then just being surrounded by all those big names, big shots. It was interesting to say that point. But I think, what I realized is, okay, they may have big titles, and they're talking about, big amounts, huge money, huge projects, but ultimately it boils down to always a bit of the same thing, about, okay, getting your facts right and making a decision at some point in time, which seems to be the most logical and thing to do. And sort of, I learned a lot during that time. And then when sort of, Novartis was hitting a bit of a sort of a break in their company growth, I then decided to sort of basically jump into Biotech. That was back in 22 years ago, with basically leaving sort of, what was it, 70,000 employees at that point in time, get into a 600 people biotech organization, Biotech, with activities in Germany, but also in the UK. So that was also my first exposure, sort of internationally, running, but basically being a sort of more on the senior team of a smaller biotech there.
Yeah, makes sense. Before we talk about Biotech, for those who might not know, what exactly is competitive intelligence? Give us a bit of an overview of that.
Competitive intelligence is, I think, in the meantime, the meaning and sort of the importance of that function has largely evolved. I think at that point in time, when I took over the job at Novartis, it was to some extent basically bringing together data sources. You have a lot of sort of data providers in the pharma industry. Bringing that together, making a sort of a one source, or sort of trying to also convene all those opinions and numbers into some sort of market assessment and so on. That was the one part. The second part, which then I think really started to become very proactive on, is to understand what our competitors were doing in given indications. For example, Novartis had a large cardiovascular franchise, and we knew that some competitors had products in development. So we wanted to understand, where they stand, what the issues are, who are they involved with, and actually we got so good within the 21 months I've been running this function. We were externally benchmarked twice, and I think when I started, this was sort of the reason why one of my main tasks was to consolidate all those little competitive intelligence functions the company had across the globe into one large unit. And when we got benchmarked in the first place externally, I think we were somewhere in the 20s. When I left, we were number 2 in the world.
Okay.
And the only company that we were competing with that was sort of in the front running, which was MSD, but they had been putting a lot of money into competitive intelligence for many years before. And so I think we did a pretty good job. I think ultimately there was some estimate that we helped save the company about 400 million over the course of that 2 years. So that was the financial impact.
And then what was your approach to that? Because I guess this applies to lots of different scenarios. You went in and sort of improved the department, but then it might be taking over a company, or it might be that you're running a business that's in challenging times. What were the things that you did there that made such a dramatic shift in that group, do you think?
I think it's like with a startup. I mean, you're trying to sort of build a vision, and it's like building something together. You have something that you basically try to bring people together that help you to build that greater picture. And this is what we did there. And then ultimately we were really, in the beginning, everybody was super skeptical because they had been doing competitive intelligence. As I said, each function has a bit here, a bit there. Yeah. And it was a lot of talking, a lot of bringing people together, making them aware of what we're doing, helping them to understand how we're doing things and what sort of, the impact may be. And ultimately, and we started, a very interesting program. I think nowadays it's pretty standard. Was sort of doing conference competitive intelligence. So whenever there was a clinician going out to a conference, one of the large conference, AHA, for example, is American Heart Association with 25,000 people. Yes, you will bump into a competitor. It's evidently so that we basically gave him a brief and said, hey, there is competitor XYZ. They are talking about product ABC. Can you find out what they specifically say? Whether they announce any new plans? Truck development, line extension, whatever. And by the time when I left, and I already started this pretty early in the game when I basically started to form the department there. And at the end of the day, it was such a sort of, inherited thing within the organization that basically we didn't have to ask. People were coming up with reports left and right. We had a problem to scan and screen all those bits and pieces of information, but they made a lot of sense. And then I think it was clear that the next stage is that we would take the department and bring it together with some other sort of service units. But at that stage, I said the company was going through some transformation, and they were not ready. In the meantime, they have done that shift and then outsourced it. After they've done the shift, they outsourced, or they basically put everything into India. So
Interesting.
Sort of the way of that stuff, how it goes. But for me, it was clear. I've been very, very much working on the strategic side for a long time at Novartis for more than 5 years, and I wanted to get a bit more operational, get more into the sort of unknown of biotech. Join the dark side of things.
Fair enough. And so there is, I would imagine, a very big shift going from 70,000 people to 600. 600, not a tiny company, right? There's people there, and there's lots of capability there. But tell us about that shift. So you joined as chief business officer and focused on growing their discovery business, and what was that transition like, having come out of such a huge organization?
I think it was, first of all, it was about the expectation. So you came in as the guy from the big company. So they were expecting all the answers from you.
Okay.
Which, normally you don't have. You get in and then they say, okay, we're planning about doing something here in diabetes or CNS. So tell us what we should do. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me understand what you guys have been doing, and then let's see, where we are and how we're gonna get perhaps to the best outcome over the next couple of years. So, it was a bit of it, when you're in a large corporation, because there's so much activity going on. You're trying to basically understand what's going on, basically in your inner circle, or perhaps a bit out of your inner circle there. But there you're on the spotlight, every day in smaller organizations, and everybody's expecting sort of the answer from you. And that was certainly a learning in the beginning. I think we and also sort of Biotech at that point in time was coming again through a merger experience. This was when Biotech merged with OAI, and there were a lot of discussions going on about the right structure and everything. So that certainly was also something to experience this firsthand. Was interesting to see, to be perfectly honest. And we sort of tried to manage as much as possible with that integration going on the both sides, being Germany, being the UK. At some point in time, it was clear that, the company, not just only needs to look backward, but also forward. And then we sort of, had a plan and a strategy to on the one hand side, enhance the service business. And I think the company has been doing very well on that one. And at that stage, I think it was at least the plan to get some own discovery development projects up and running. And there we looked in a couple of indications with a couple of companies, and then by the time when the company took a decision to basically bring back in Biotech Neuroscience, which just a couple of months before they had been spinning out to some investors that basically bring that back in. I didn't find this the smartest move, to be perfectly honest. So when the first CEO position came along, because that was clear for me that okay, now basically being on the C level, being on the senior level, that's great. But ultimately, being the guy responsible for all of that, I think was, at that age was, I think, sort of, the next step for me personally to get there.
No, that makes sense. And it's always a different type of role than any other executive position, right? It's a different perspective. It's a different view on things, different level of responsibility. And of course, there's getting the job of being the CEO, and then there's becoming a CEO, and those are kind of two related but different things. So I guess, tell us a bit about your observations of the difference between your chief business officer role and your CEO role, and then how did you go about sort of becoming good at doing that job?
But I think, it's perhaps, a bit of a mentality thing. I'm always trying to jump into the exercise. And I think it was the same thing, when I then moved to Sunix. I mean, we were 15 people maximum. It was a spin-off from Bayer. So we had a bit still of connection to a large corporation, but we're basically sort of, on our own. And then the fun part was that there was a investor who was basically promising to put money in. This is, I think, the main reason why I joined, because I knew that because the business had been going through troubled times beforehand. So I said, okay, if you guys are going to put some money in, then we could develop this. And that was primarily sort of, on the early days of high throughput proteomics, to have sort of, a bioanalytical tool. So I said, okay, we can make this successful. And at some point in time, we're gonna be certainly looking and be interesting enough for a larger corporation. Fun part was I started a couple of weeks after I started. The investor told us they have difficulties bringing the money in. So that was okay. Becoming a CEO, I think from there on it was sort of firefighting and emergency. We realized okay, we're not going to make it too long, and this is I think going back to the fun part. You're meeting a lot of interesting people. So as part of the Biotech endeavor, I had been meeting some people that actually had been building out QIAGEN. And basically I knew that they had an interest in some of the products, we were sort of, developing and starting to sell there in Cologne. So I called one of the founders of QIAGEN up and said, hey, got your number. We have this product. We need a bit of help. Can you think this might be of interest? I didn't know at that point in time that QIAGEN was exactly looking for those kind of products. So I think we did the first deal. It took us about 2 weeks. That basically sort of, saved the company. And then there was a sort of a more ordinary second deal where then basically sort of, assets had been fully transferred to QIAGEN. The people they were interested in to keep were also transferred. And then basically at some point in time, sort of the investors then had been winding down the rest of that organization. I stayed on a bit with QIAGEN to help them integrate. And then moved on. Then basically really into my first real CEO position, building out the company over the course of roughly 3.5 years there.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so the first one was kind of just shepherding the situation to its natural conclusion. Then you had to go and actually build a company. So yeah, tell us about that. So obviously you'd built teams, you'd built sort of divisions and things like that. Tell us about building a company and how that was different.
Yeah, I mean it's I think like with any good stuff, I think if you need a sort of basically a core that everything starts from. You need to have sort of people that are aligned on some ideas that how you can build a product, how you can build a service. I mean, mostly when I get into company, that idea is already there. It's more about sort of developing the idea and everything that comes with it. And when you then have an idea, you build a product, you build a service, then you look, okay, there may be a customer. Let's talk to those guys. Let's learn something there. When you learn something, then you basically should bring it back and should advance, should improve. And then as the company evolves and emerges, then you need to build up functions. You need to build up sort of bringing more people. Need to see where your weak spots are and how you can improve. And ultimately, it's always about sort of reaching milestones, getting to the next level. And the most important part is about communication, so that everybody sort of feels they are engaged, they are involved, they understand what they're doing, in the day-to-day job and how it's actually impacting the organization on their way to bigger and better things.
Yeah, absolutely. So that idea of communication came up in the sort of conversation around building the competitive intelligence group or shaping the competitive intelligence group as well. And I think it's interesting today, right? The way we communicate has changed, and the way that we work has changed. And I think what I see a lot out there is some companies don't communicate anywhere near enough, and kind of, people are less connected to the center, and that happens for sure. I also see some companies that think the answer to that is communicating everything to everybody all the time, and that causes its own problems. So, how do you think about communication in a company?
But I think people should have a general sense where the company is heading. I think this is something what all employees deserve, and they should understand also on a regular basis where on that endeavor where the company stands. Are we doing well, or there are some pitfalls, or or deviations, or we have been hitting some roadblock that we need to overcome. And I think that should really happen fairly regularly. You could do. I mean, I've mostly been doing it on a monthly basis. Sometimes on every other month. I think that's fine. And people, who just basically. I mean, now you have more sort of remote work in let's say a couple of years ago. I think, people were always sort of, in the company, so I think, they had a good feeling where the company stands.
Yeah.
That is the one thing. I think normally what I do is I have an inner circle of people, senior managers that basically have a very thorough understanding where the company stands. Also involving stuff which is not sort of suited for, let's say, the average employee. That's I think, at least my take on this. And I think when you then see, okay, there's an issue, it maybe become a significant issue. Once it's resolved, I think then you can basically disclose it to everybody, because people then will see, okay, there was a real issue, there's a solution to it. But if you basically bring up issue after issue and there is no solution, people will simply get
yes,
tired. On the one hand side, they also are afraid of what's happening. Because they don't have any direct control or any direct influence on whatever may be happening there. So it's always sort of, basically, it's a very balanced way of communicating here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes sense. I'm also interested, Michael, you've been running companies for 20 years now. And before that, involved in leadership roles as well. And I'm always fascinated by, we're obviously in a period of significant change in the world, in the biotech sector, in our lives in general, whether that's technologically, economically, politically. Like, there's so much going on. There's so much change in the world right now, right? And it struck me recently, I was involved in a mentoring program. Like, it's a business mentoring program for young people who basically wanted to start businesses. One of the guys who was one of the other mentors on there, he was in his early 90s. He'd been an entrepreneur and a CEO since he was 25. He'd started several companies and built several companies, some of them quite large. He was actually just about to start a new company because he'd invented something new that he wanted to spin out, even at the age of 91, 92, whatever he was. And what I found really interesting was that when he talked at the beginning of the program, we all sort of talked a little bit about, well, what do we think business is about? What do we think entrepreneurship's about? That kind of stuff. And when he talked about his view on it, the one thing that really struck me was how little the principles have changed, even though the details have. He talked about it being about people and about finding something people need and really caring about your customers and how you can deliver for them, and building great teams and building great relationships and all that kind of stuff. I just found it really interesting that those things have remained consistent, but then the way that we do that has changed so much. So I was interested to see from your point of view, in biotech particularly, what do you think has changed over the period you've been running biotech companies, and what do you think stayed the same?
I think if everything has changed and nothing has changed. So I think I could echo what the gentleman has said there. I think that there are some basic fundamentals which have not really changed that much. I mean, I think that those apply, to humanity and mankind to some extent, and perhaps not just only business principles, but sort of principles in life. I think what has changed in the biotech field for sure is let's say the intensity. I think 15, 20 years ago, if you had a great idea, you were capable of developing great companies. Right. This is, I think, money was always tight, but you had the time. Today, if you have sort of, one great idea, you can, and it's somewhere published, you can be pretty sure that 6 months after, you have 5 competitors on your heels. and they may have more money, they may have better
Yes.
people, whatever. They operate in a complete different sphere. So let's say that the time to build something up meaningful is much less and much more compressed there. And this is, I think, what is changing to some extent the way that companies have been operating. So it's all about sort of speed of execution is the key thing. I wouldn't even say IP or any of that stuff. I think, the faster you are, the less you are dependent on IP. It's about relationship. It's really about getting product market fit. And product means sort of, generally speaking about a product. To get that as quickly as possible, because when you then see that sort of, you have some recurring business coming in one way or the other, it triggers so many more things than if you have to go through financing round after financing round to build something out. And even if the amounts nowadays, at least on paper are larger than you may be getting, finally ending up with a VC, it's still sort of the same issue that the costs are also much higher than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think we have been calculating at Biotech, for clinical trials, phase 1 trial at that point in time, phase 2 trials. I think that the average we assumed that you may need about 3 to 5 million, to get successfully there. If you would be starting now below 10 to 20 million, everybody would be laughing at you. It's just different. The bar has been constantly set higher there. Whether it's better or not, that's a different discussion.
Yeah, I see. So the shape of it has not really changed, but the capital intensity, the speed intensity, all that kind of stuff is just increasing all the time.
Yeah. Well, if you look right now, ADC is these antibody drug conjugates. I think after the 10th that got 100 million round, I have been stop counting. This is sort of, you didn't have that 10, 15 years ago. You had people were really trying to sort of do something unique. Now it's a bit of more of a Me Too, even if they are not classified as a Me Too. And a lot of actually has been is still sort of, in my view, a result of the COVID times, when you had a lot of sort of investors coming to the life sciences biotech space and putting money in, and some of them are still there, many left, but it's still sort of a common theme there.
Yeah, there also seems to be a bit of a trend that investors used to be successful entrepreneurs, whereas now they're employees of funds and they're MBAs and they're that kind of stuff. And of course, those two types of people just have a different view of risk and a different view of opportunity, right?
Yeah. 20 years ago, and I think I was doing my first financing round roughly 20 years ago. Across Europe, you would have had 25 VCs, perhaps 30. So you approach them all, and after you spoke with all of them, you knew whether you have a business or not, or business case or not. Right now you have hundreds of funds, and I think at that point in time, sort of the classical VC structure was you had 2 partners, perhaps 2 analysts, principals, and then and 1 admin. That was sort of the setup. I think some of those major funds. It takes you hours to scan through the team sort of pedigree they have on the website and sort of see who's all up there. For some of those really large funds there.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, right? Because now we end up with all these businesses that are designed for the VC model, and they're designed to be attractive to those funds rather than necessarily to be really effective and to be good businesses and to deliver and things like that. And I don't think those two things are necessarily mutually exclusive, but they are slightly different.
Oh, yeah. But the model has changed quite a bit. Well, I heard already that it's sort of going back, to some solo solo GPs that actually sort of, running the fund by their own. Those are smaller funds, those perhaps are 25 to 50 million funds, and they're not investing in 300 companies, but perhaps, 5 to 10. But trying to stay close with those, because some of the large funds, I can't imagine how they're going to be staying close to any of their portfolio companies there.
No, agree. Well, and so just to wrap us up, Michael, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of your career. If there's one thing that you know now, or maybe two things, whatever comes to mind, that you know now that you wish you'd known at the start of your career, or that would have been useful to you, what are the key lessons that you've learned over the years, do you think?
Looking backwards right now, I know I made a couple of good decisions in terms of sort of chemistry, bringing me into life science, bringing me into pharma, biotech. I think I could tick that box, and also sort of basically working with very skilled people to build companies for the sake of helping customers, patients, whatever. I think this is also something. I think the one thing in order to perhaps which would have made my life easier, would have been to move to the US at some point in time, much earlier. It's simply, I think, when you compare Europe to the US for the last 20 years there, building out businesses in the US would have been much easier compared to anything in Europe. Europe is, and still is sort of a lot about sort of bootstrapping. The UK may be a bit of an exception, but most of the rest of Europe, particularly sort of Germany, where I've been mostly active for my career, it's about sort of you start with some small money, then you're building out, then you get a bit of more money, but then when I think you're really at the point of when you need money in order to really scale big, in order to match some of those US guys that come up with large numbers, whether justified or not, I think that is still missing there. So situation would have been solved either moving to the US or leaving the sector at some stage, or I don't know, going back to a large corporation and taking a day-to-day job. I don't know.
No, but it's true, isn't it? I think even in the remote world that we're in, you can see across the world, location does have a huge impact on your chances of success and your chances of growth and all that kind of stuff. And we operate in a global economy in almost every industry now. I won't comment on politics, but whether that will continue to be the case remains to be seen. But I think it's a good point. If you have the choice, why not set yourself up in the place where you have the best chance of success, right? Not everyone has the choice, but it's an interesting point. Michael, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I've really enjoyed it. Best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium or TikTok. See you next time.